Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Orange Crush podcast. My name's Grayson Mann, flying solo today, but we've been saying it for the last couple of weeks that we've had a stacked lineup with a bunch of fun guests. We had Eric Bakich, baseball head coach for the Tigers. We had David Pollack, and now we have JD PicKell, one of the rising stars in college football, national analyst for On3. You can find him on the YouTube page for On3 at the hard count. JD, man, this is one of I'm pumped, man. Like this, I can't really put it into words, but you're absolutely killing it. All your stuff. We'll link down your show below so you guys can check it out. But JD, welcome to the show, man. How you been, man?
Dude, better now. I'm fired up to be on with you. And I mean, that guest list you just rattled off before bringing me on, dude, it's big shoes to fill. So I'm going to do my best, but pumped to be on with you. And it's been a long time coming, dude. So I'm glad we got it done.
It's really funny how this got set up. We were talking a little bit briefly before the show started that it was a matter of circumstance. I'm sitting in the press conference with Dabo Swinney after the Florida State game last year. And usually with losses, he's a little more brief with us than usual. And I get a text saying, "Do you know who JD PicKell is? He's in the media room." And I was freaking out. Like I tried to keep a calm composure because I didn't want Swinney to dead eye me and be like, "Why is this kid freaking out in the press conference room?" I was like, "Yes, I will be down there in 5 minutes. Try to stall him." Rush down there. We end up linking up on Twitter, and it got us to this point, man. So just what was your initial impression of that trip to Memorial Stadium? Was that your first time in Death Valley?
Dude, first time. It was so funny because we roll up and everybody is saying, like, one, everybody is so nice. Like, that was the first thing. Like, everyone is so accommodating and showing you around. So, like, that was, I think, the first thing that stood out. But everyone kept saying, "Hey, come back for a night game. Oh, this is your first time, come back for a night game." And so that kind of tempers expectations a little bit because I'm like, okay, everyone keeps telling me that nighttime is the time to be here. But we're about to have a sick game right now with two teams that are ranked, I believe, at the time, like, definitely the top 20. It might have been even higher than that, depending on where they were at that point in the season. But I thought the environment for a noon kick was electric. Like, my takeaway was, okay, if this is noon, everyone keeps telling me that night is crazy. Like, I don't know what a night game would even be. So I was blown away, man. It was phenomenal.
Hopefully they'll send you back. I think Clemson LSU has a strong chance to be a night game. We'll get into all of that with 2025. Yeah. But JD, I think it's unique bringing you on here specifically because you were there to witness the 2023 product for Clemson. And we'll get into all things Clemson and more of a national picture with your analysis. But looking from 2023 to last fall and just where the Tigers were, sort of their rise back to the college football playoff, maybe just from looking at it with your eyes on the field versus seeing it more on a TV background perspective, what was the biggest maybe stark difference between 2023's team and the product that we just saw in the fall?
Dude, the playmakers was what jumped out to me. Like, Antonio Williams is a dude. I don't think he played against Florida State. I think it was unhealthy in that game. But just the caliber of dude they have on the perimeter with those freshmen and TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco. Like, I'm curious to see how I'm received with your fan base, Grayson, because for a minute there, I've been kind of lukewarm to borderline cold on Clemson because of the skill players. I'm just sitting here saying, okay, if Keon Coleman on that day against Florida State switches jerseys, like, Clemson might win the football game. And they got Keon Coleman via the portal. So my issue was, the portal conversations may be a little bit overdone, but I was sitting here saying, why is nobody at the high school level recruited to this roster that can help them on the perimeter and be a explosive threat for them? So seeing those guys and what they did this season, both those freshmen being, what they were and guys that caught over 14 yards a reception and Cade Klubnik's progress, all those things to me make me really excited about 2024. But I think that was the biggest difference for me, just watching what they were from that game and what they were this past season.
Yeah, one of the things too that stood out, you mentioned the receivers, 14 yards a catch, something that doesn't really jump to you until you really look at the stat sheet of what they're able to produce on the field. And TJ Moore didn't really play as much at the beginning of the year as compared to Wesco, just because of the mid-year enrollee, sort of the process of learning the playbook. But one quote that caught me was Swinney said, "We're in the process of building a monster here with someone like TJ Moore." Comes out and has his best career game against Texas, a defense that I believe at the time, I think Arizona State might have changed that 2 weeks later. But Clemson had put up the most offense on Texas's defense until you have Scatabo turn into Superman. But a performance there that I think has leveled the playing field in terms of expectations for 2025. I guess looking at that playoff game, just to quickly jump on that before we get more big picture, just what was the sort of level idea of, okay, this is a 12 seed Clemson. They sort of snuck into the playoff thanks to Fran Brown and Syracuse. Just that end of the season picture. What was that impression for Clemson from going to losing to South Carolina to being in the playoff picture? It was a really interesting roller coaster affair for the last 2 weeks of the regular season.
No, it completely did. I think for me, it just validated so much of everything Clemson had done that season. Because if they had walked out there and drawn Arizona State in the first round and done that, you say, okay, like that's great for Clemson, but that's big, the Big 12 and ASU. And I think everyone has their own narrative around other conferences in college football, whether it's right or wrong. But when you look at what Texas was, just statistically speaking, from an NFL draft perspective here in the future, like they got some real dudes in that secondary. And in the biggest game of Clemson's season, even though they came up short, like Cade Klubnik steps up to the plate and swings big and goes for over 300 yards through the air. TJ Moore, they just routinely went to him. And so that just made me feel so much like, okay, what we're seeing from Clemson against other competition, whatever you think about it, it's legitimized when you play a secondary the caliber of Texas. So that got me excited if that's the springboard for what 2025 is going to be. But yeah, it made it feel very real.
It felt like in 2024, I had said this to just friends, whoever we talked to, it felt like 2024 was a real fork in the road season for Clemson because of the last few years of not making the playoffs. Sort of the season standard had sort of changed, and it felt like if they could get back to the postseason in the inaugural year of the 12-team playoff, there's sort of a message you send nationally. In the conversations that you've had maybe outside of the Clemson bubble that we're in talking right now, what's maybe a national perception of this team going into next year? Does that status or brand of the playoffs was more of a formality and expectation when the Deshaun Watsons, the Trevor Lawrences were rolling around campus? What's maybe that, how did that change seeing Clemson do what they did in 24?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of the time, the last game we get from any team is sort of the narrative that we carry into the offseason. Even though Clemson lost to Texas, the way they showed up offensively in that spot and with Cade Klubnik coming back and the young receivers, all the things we've talked about, I think the thought, for me at least, around Clemson and what we see in Vegas, with those odds for them to be the favorite to win the ACC, I think there's that same buzz around Clemson. Because I think the last couple of seasons, regardless, I think Clemson actually was favored last year to win the ACC as well. But or was it Florida State? They were in the mix regardless. But my thought around that is when you look at expectations just from a college football public perspective, I think there's a lot more of a thought of, hey, they could really do something. Like Clemson's not sneaking up on anybody. Even if Clemson was in the top 3 for the odds to win the conference a year ago, I don't think you had a lot of people making them the trendy pick. It was Miami, it was Florida State, and we all know how that turned out. But now there's this thought of, hey, preseason, you don't have to really squint to see what Clemson could be. You feel like you know who Cade Klubnik is. Obviously, you know who Dabo Swinney is. I think a lot of people are excited about what that defense will be under Tom Allen, and they weren't even necessarily bad last year statistically. So I think the buzz is kind of back around Clemson. I don't think they're going to be a trendy pick for anybody when we do the preseason predictions in August.
Yeah, you won't get the viral, JD's picking Clemson to be a playoff contender. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Let's touch on Tom Allen real quickly, because something that's unique with you, and you and Josh Pater, like the category of the college football podcast that I have to listen to. It's you two and nobody else. I have to put that out there. But covering the college football playoff, you had obviously had a trip to Atlanta, but Penn State was a team that hung around there, and I think was a better Drew Aller performance away from playing in the national championship. But with Tom Allen coming to Clemson, not something that where he wasn't a free agent at the time. He was not poached. That's not the right word. But Clemson did get him from Penn State. He wasn't looking. There wasn't hey, he's a free agent, this is going to be an option for him. Just what was your reaction at the time when that kind of hire was made? Because down here, there was 2 weeks of it's going to be this guy. It's going to be this guy from the Broncos. It was just a frenzy. Tom Allen wasn't even on anyone's radar until about a day or two before the hire happened, and everyone's going, whoa, okay, that's a serious move there from Dabo Swinney and co. What was your reaction, especially given it had been just a couple of weeks before Penn State was removed from an Natty?
Yeah, I think my first reaction was, oh, Dabo's playing ball. Like Dabo, because I know the narrative around him, and narratives are dangerous, but it's always been, well, he's usually going to look internally. He's going to promote within from his staff. And not that he's always done that. There's several examples where he hasn't, Garrett Riley being one of the more notable ones. But the fact that they went and grabbed him, not just from a defense that was one of the best in college football last year. But from a team, and you just mentioned, they were probably in a position where they should have played for a national championship. Like they were a bad Drew Aller decision away from maybe having a chance to go kick their own game-winning field goal and play Ohio State for a rematch in Atlanta. And so for them to go grab the DC from a team that was in that position, I think it says how serious Dabo Swinney is. I think it shows that he is willing to adapt to an extent of maybe his previous, way of hiring his staff. And then also it says that Clemson brand still has some massive weight to it. Like I think a lot of us sort of dismissed Clemson over the last couple of years. Not that they weren't still going to be a high profile team and be a team that could make some noise, but it felt like maybe there was some shine that was lost when they made the college football playoffs 6 years in a row. And then there's a little bit of a step back as we move into the modern era. So the fact that Tom Allen pivoted away from Penn State and went to Clemson again, Dabo playing ball, the Clemson brand, and just felt again, just like that buzz is back around Clemson, South Carolina.
There was one thing that you put up on Twitter was something about why you were lukewarm, sort of cold on Clemson, and that sort of narrative has shifted in your mind. Just what are some of the factors, just to describe to our TigerNet audience who may not be following you? You should go check out JD. We'll have that linked below. But what are some of the things now in 2025 that you look for and you go, okay, if you were going to map out, like it's obviously February 7th that we're recording this. The season isn't going to be here for a long time. The spring transfer portal window may add a couple of spots to certain teams. We'll see. But when you look at Clemson as a national championship contender, what are some of those ingredients? If you mix into a bowl, you go, okay, this is going to be something pretty good.
Yeah, I think the defense we talked about, them potentially improving under Tom Allen, even just from a temperature perspective, when you think about those Brent Venables coach defenses, the word that comes to mind is violent. Another word is aggressive. And I think that's going to be the same tempo under Tom Allen. Again, it's not knocking Wes Goodwin. I think that, again, statistically had a fine product. Just fine isn't the standard at Clemson. And so that was the other thing that is encouraging to me. And I know this isn't answering the question that you asked, but the other thing that's encouraging to me is Dabo Swinney. To me, it felt like when I would hear him talk after losses or address like Clemson's underperformance, it was always in the vein of, well, what Clemson was before I got here. We were fired up to win 8 games, fired up to win 9 games. And it's like, yes, but you've sort of changed what that expectation is. So the fact that they are, I think, maybe understanding what their expectations are that they've earned, I think that means something that I appreciate about this team. But going back to your question, the defense being a more aggressive temperature, Cade Klubnik potentially taking another step, his 3rd year in Garrett Riley's system. We mentioned the weapons, like all those things you mix together, you say, okay, if that defense is even improved from the outfit that allowed 24 a game, which is pretty solid, and you have a quarterback that levels up again and you can be more versatile. There's all these things where I'm like, man, I don't know the game that you point to for Clemson and you say, hey, they're going to be outmatched in that spot. Hey, I don't love the style of play this team brings to the table against Clemson. I don't see that on the schedule. Now, it's not going to be an easy schedule by any stretch, as you well know, Grayson, with them opening with the other Tigers and another team that plays in Death Valley in that first game. But there's not a spot where I'm like, man, Clemson just chalk it up for a loss. I don't see that on the schedule, which I think to be here in February and to have that attitude, it's exciting, and it should be exciting.
It's going to be really fascinating to see how that all develops in the spring. And you talk about the sort of the aggression and Dabo's playing ball. Did it again this morning, hiring the executive from the Chargers for player personnel, like Kevin Kelly coming in there, someone that drafted Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, that Clemson connection, Joey Bosa. There's going to be just that added sense of, I think, fresh ideas. And that's something that I've been pushing for a while. When it started with Garrett Riley, and then you have Matt Luke come in, you have Chris Rumpf come in, Tom Allen, and then you add him. It's just this people, different voices in the room, especially in the CFPR where it says, hey, we've done it this way, or hey, Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers, he's done it this way. It's just that infusion of ideas that I think only makes your coaching staff more rich. Something I've been begging for the Patriots to do, and now they're finally doing it with Mike Vrabel. But seeing it on the Clemson side has to be maybe pretty encouraging, especially given this morning.
And that's kind of been, I think, the knock nationally against Dabo Swinney is sticking to his guns almost, to a detriment. Hey, they're not going to even look at the portal. They're not even going to try and adjust there. They go out and get a Will Helt, who, when they got him, I believe was like a top 5 edge in the transfer portal coming over from Purdue. Hey, he's probably going to try to stick mostly internally with his staff, and he's not really going to look too far outside the walls of that building in Clemson, South Carolina, to put his staff together. You mentioned the director of player personnel coming from the NFL level. We talked about Tom Allen. Garrett Riley obviously poached their national title appearance for TCU. So, like, I understand where the Dabo Swinney, like, stuck in his ways talking point comes from, but we look at his track record over the course of the last couple of years, and Dabo Swinney isn't being too stubborn to not adjust to help his football team. And if he's going to do that, and that's going to be the way that Clemson trends here going forward, if he's willing to adapt. We mentioned the Clemson brand, and I think I have to imagine too, the resources in Clemson, South Carolina, those are, I believe, powerful enough to, if you were to activate them to their fullest extent, Clemson's right back where they have been traditionally, which is a college football playoff team, an ACC champion, and right there in the mix of it with the Big Ten and the SEC for a national championship kind of season.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to monitor that 2025. Going more of a national picture, JD, I want to start first in the ACC because I always think it's interesting. It's been sort of a fluid. It's almost like the NFC East. We get a different champion each year for the last several seasons. Do you see somebody that maybe can challenge for Clemson's throne in 2025? Is it Miami with Carson Beck? Is SMU someone that teams should look for again? That's not going to be a sophomore slump in the ACC. Or is it someone maybe like Virginia Tech that had higher expectations but sort of fell short? In your eyes and in your evaluation, again, to our audience, it is very early, so
Sure.
These could be changed. Don't flame us for something that happens almost months later. But JD, who do you see potentially as a dark horse in this conference to challenge Clemson for that throne?
Yeah, I guess Miami would be my layup answer, right? Because Carson Beck and what he's been in college football, even last year, how much he's getting dunked on. The guy was still like a top 10 quarterback when it comes to QBR in the country with the receiver room that led America in drops. So I think Miami is one that just has to be talked about in the discussion for ACC championships. But I think Louisville is really fascinating just because with Jeff Brom, with him continuing to prove like he's going to try to be the Lane Kiffin of the ACC in the sense that he'll go to the portal every year. He'll take a large number of guys. They'll retool their roster, and they'll probably be in a spot where they can, be pretty competitive. So I think just the way that he runs things, they're kind of always going to be a wild card. And I'm not so sure that it's a matter of time before they have maybe that staff and that mix of that roster any given year kind of have the perfect mesh, and maybe they go on a run. So we'll see. But I do think Miller Moss coming over from USC got a lot of flack for, getting benched at USC. I don't know that he was the problem. And I think most people close to USC would say that. So I think Miller Moss and what he is really interesting when you compare that with previous portal quarterbacks they've had at Louisville. I'm excited to see what they are in the future.
And USC, what a mess last year. Miller Moss, I really did like the move for Miller Moss. I felt like that was a good, fresh change of scenery with staff that's really serious over there in Louisville. Clemson will play on Friday night in Louisville in November. A lot of Clemson fans were not too happy about that scheduling. Not a break in the schedule there where you have back-to-back games in November where you go down to go up to Louisville, on a Friday. So that'll be an interesting matchup and a redemption potentially for this Clemson team that got stumped by Louisville last year. JD, looking at more further out than Clemson, it was really fascinating to hear David's thoughts on just the lessons learned in college football in 2024, just because it was a guinea pig year. You had the 12-team playoff. The NIL world continues to expand. We're going to have the House settlement in July, so there's going to be more continuous changes. You were there in Atlanta. You watched the confetti fall. You watched Jeremiah Smith do what he does, and Ryan Day getting his first national title as the Ohio State head coach. What maybe lessons do you think were learned in college football in 2024, not just of what Ohio State was able to do, but just in your estimation, your analysis, what you've been able to cover? You leave no stone unturned. What did you see as something that maybe Clemson can pull from, or other teams in college football can say, we need to potentially copy this or grab that specific formula? What worked in 2024 and what do teams need to learn?
It's sort of a funny way to say it out loud, but like the most talented team in college football, I think more often than not is going to be your team that wins a national championship. Now, you have to obviously make that work together and have the right culture in place, which I think Clemson fans probably should feel good about. But for Ohio State, what they did at the end of the year, I don't think was massively surprising to anybody, because we said all offseason, hey, if they put it together, they got even before we knew who Jeremiah Smith was going to be, we knew he'd be a factor. We knew Will Howard was probably an upgrade from McCord. We knew that defense was going to be nasty and that back. So all those things. And it's just like, it didn't come together in the regular season and in the new era of college football with this 12-team playoff. And I expect us to go probably to like 14 or 16 in this next iteration. Like, that's okay. And as someone who loves the regular season and what the regular season has been, maybe that sits a little bit funny with us, but even with that being said, like, you can now afford to have an acclimation period, if you will. Like, if you don't run the gauntlet and go undefeated and win your conference, like, probably not ideal for checking off all your lists of goals that you have preseason. But when you get to that dance, as long as you're hot at the right time and your talent is firing all cylinders, I think the most talented roster, when everyone's beat up in the month of December going into January, I think they're going to probably have a better than not chance to go win the whole darn thing. And we saw that with Ohio State. Will that be the way it is in the future in terms of having like that large of a talent gap between them and the rest of college football? Remains to be seen. But one more thing I'll add here, Grayson, is everyone made so much about Ohio State and their alleged $20 million roster, which is totally fair, because here at a number of $20 million to put together a roster full of college kids is kind of jarring. But I really think, and Pete Nakos, who does great work for us here at On3, has an article out on this. I think that's just scratching the surface of what like these big boys are going to be working with in the future. Like, now it's out there for everybody. Hey, $20 million unofficially is the price of a national championship caliber roster. Okay, I mean, the big pockets of Michigan, I think they'll be in that discussion. I expect Clemson, I bet when revenue sharing comes around, they'll be in that discussion. The SEC, they'll be in that discussion. So $20 million, it sounds like a lot right now. I think it'll be probably $25, $30 million in the future.
And what's really interesting to me, I was listening to, it was either you or I'm trying to figure out what it was, but it was such a really stark point that made me go, oh yeah, that like makes a lot of sense. So you don't really think about it, is what ran Georgia into the ground this year, which is the depth. And sometimes when you get into these longer seasons where you have 14, 15, 16, I'm trying to find the right number of games Ohio State played, but going from hosting a home playoff game, then going to California for the Rose Bowl, traveling to Texas for the Cotton Bowl, then to Atlanta, and you just have, it feels like nonstop. Depth becomes an important piece. Do you see that maybe being an underrated factor of, obviously there's going to be talk about the Jeremiah Smiths of the world, the Cade Klubniks, you're going to have the big transfer portal names, but what happens with those guys who, when things start to fall apart or injuries happen, who's going to be behind them? That development piece on these campuses is going to be a big crucial piece. How do you see that maybe playing out where you have Gunnar Stockton starting in a college football playoff quarterfinal because Carson Beck goes down, and not necessarily that Stockton lost it for him, but it was a factor heading into that game with Notre Dame. So how do you maybe see that playing out as the bumps and bruises continue to accumulate throughout the season and Ohio State healthy and hot at the right time?
Yeah, to me, that almost further emphasizes the importance of high school recruiting, which I think Clemson fans will probably be encouraged to hear from a macro level with how Dabo operates in the portal versus high school. Because I think so many people today are maybe a little bit jaded about recruiting classes because they say, okay, well, that's great. We got this 5-star cat, but if he doesn't start next year or the year after, we all know he's going to probably hit the portal. And while that may be true, to me, if you're banking on, just call it a random number, 20% of whoever you sign is going to at one point in time hit the portal. Let's just say that's the number. Doesn't that mean that your other 80% of your signing class better be dudes who can play for you whenever they're called upon, whether it be as a freshman or a sophomore, whenever? So I think recruiting at the high school level, to speak to your point about depth, you got to have it, especially when you play games into December, and now it's going to be like January 27th, I think, is like the 2026 or 2027 national title game. That's a long time. That's a lot of games. And so I think the portal definitely has hurt depth across the board, and everyone's talking about that. But the way, in my mind, to combat that is to make sure the guys that you recruit and the guys that do stay on your roster that don't hit the portal are of a high enough caliber to where you can count on them if, unfortunately, you have to go into a spot where you got to play them in a high-stakes moment.
It's something that the recruit told me over the phone one time over the summer was that the way Clemson sort of used the portal was an intriguing factor to them because of that development piece of, if it doesn't work out for me in year one, because we've seen players jump off the page in year 3, year 4, but they stayed and they sort of were the homegrown talent. He said that was important to him. And I never had heard that since the portal has become such a big deal. so other schools, there's the Florida States, the Ole Misses, the Louisvilles, Colorados, where it's free agency. And we've seen it work, and we've also seen the 2-10 version of Florida State that it doesn't work out. But where do you maybe see college football with the portal, NIL, if you were to be able to take a look into the future? Let's do the Nostradamus of this for Mr. JD PicKell. But looking at college football in the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see the sport heading?
That's a really good question. I think in regards to the portal and NIL, I think the portal is going to maybe cool down a little bit, just because I think so much of NIL dollars are going to be geared towards roster retention. Like, my hope would be that we shrink the portal windows to where we're not having this extensive 2-week discussion of, hey, he might hit the portal because he's hearing from this school and that school. Like, to me, that's probably got to be minimized. And it's got to be about, do you want to stay or do you want to go? We can't do this whole bidding war with some imaginary hypothetical school that's offering you X when, you know, your current school is offering Y. But I think that the powers that be in college football, you know, your GMs, your director of player personnel, and things of that nature, I think that there is a understanding as well now as we move forward that that's got to be a priority for you every single offseason. You got to have the right resources to retool your roster and re-sign your guys. Like, it's funny for our social team here at On3, like, I see graphics all the time from them that have the word signed or re-signed or coming back. And it's a kid who was like a freshman last year. Like, Dylan Stewart's a great example. Put out a graphic about him coming back to South Carolina. And it's like, 5 years ago, we're not even questioning, is he going to be back at South Carolina after his freshman season? And now it's news when he decides he's coming back. So all that's to say, speaking to your question of like, where's it heading? I think the portal will still be very impactful, very important, but I don't think we're going to see the same volume that we saw maybe a year ago, where you have all these high profile guys jumping in there right away. I think the portal will be a lot more used for grabbing your guys like a John Mateer, who's going to transfer up and play in the SEC after playing at Wazoo last year, or you're a guy that pops at a G5 school and has earned the right to go play at a Big Ten school or what have you. So I think it'll be a lot more used to bring guys to a higher level of college football, but I don't think it'll be the same Hunger Games, if you will, that we've seen the last couple of cycles.
You mentioned those On3 graphics. Who's behind those? Because it might be the funniest thing that has popped up on college football recently. They're on point, man. They give me a laugh every time.
There are social team. I'm not sure if they would have an issue with me saying their name, but I think it's probably okay. Our two, I guess we have Jack Terry, who does a phenomenal job just spearheading all things social, and then Hayden Holland is also on the social team, and he attacks it as well. And then our graphic designers too, who actually make the graphics themselves, Marina Puja, Justin Garcia, like it is it's gotten to the point, Grayson, where like I almost care as much, if not more, about like what the graphic is than the news. Like, I see the news and I'm like, I see Kalen DeBoer and his face like this, and the word is just dial. And I'm like, okay, I could repurpose that for some. I could like use that in like future group chats and stuff. Then I'm like, oh, actually, there's a story that goes along with this graphic. Let me figure out what actually what happened here. So yeah, they've been on a heater, man, and it's been fun to have a front row seat for.
It started in November when Swinney told us that there was like an issue with him voting, and On3 comes out with a graphic says denied with Dabo as a picture. And it's been one of the top group chat things that I've used. It's funny how that works. I've been waiting to use it on Twitter for something Clemson related, but it hasn't come up at the right time. And I'm waiting. It keeps those On3, like the transfer portal notifications going, and I'm just see signed or dialed, or I think the last one was ponder. And it was just the one word graphics are undefeated so far.
It's been so funny. So I, on my phone, like I'm right there with you. Like, I'm thinking about, okay, could I use the DeBoer dialed for like a reaction to something or for a group chat or whatever? And I have a album on my phone that I just titled College Football Memes, and it's just for like reactions to stuff or whatever. And there's been a healthy amount of On3 graphics that have since been added since they've been on this front since November. But it's been fun, man. It's cool. And I appreciate too just the brevity it adds to the sport. Like, we all take this so seriously, and I love that, and that's a big reason why I have a job in it. But at the end of the day, like, it's the greatest sport ever, dude. And we have personalities from a Dabo Swinney to a Deion Sanders, to I'm trying to think of just other players we've had across the sport that have been phenomenal. Travis Hunter was awesome. Like, there's so much about this sport that's just so fun, So to have graphics that match up with that personality has been cool to be a part of.
Absolutely. JD, this has been a phenomenal 30 minutes. Before we get wrapped up, I'd love to give you the floor on just what you have planned at On3, talk about your show, and where guys can find you.
Man, well, I appreciate that. Well, first, if you're watching, make sure you've subscribed here and dialed in here for all the stuff Grayson's got going. That's first. But if you want to follow our content over on the On3 YouTube channel, it's college football year round, which is hysterical that they allow us to do that for a career. But I'm not asking too many questions. But yeah, over on on3.com, there's a lot of also good content from our writing team. And then if you want to follow me personally on the socials, that handle below my name there at JD PicKell. It's pretty much the handle for all the platforms from Twitter to Instagram or wherever, or X, whatever we're calling it now. You can find me there. But, man, it's been a pleasure being on with you, brother. I'm really glad we got to make this happen.
Absolutely. Hopefully we can get it done, maybe a summer update or something during the season, get you back on for a repeat episode. But, guys, this was On3's JD PicKell. What an excellent just analysis, breakdown, and an inside look at the On3 graphics. Not sure where else you're going to get that. No. That's why we subscribe to the Orange Crush podcast now. But, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all the support for the last few weeks. It's been really fun to put on these episodes and have these type of personalities and guests making an appearance. It's been great. God bless y'all. Take care. Have a good one.